Okay, there are three types of testing. There is the stub testing, black box testing, and the white box testing. I've already made a video on stub testing. You can watch that. But let's discuss black box testing. This kind of testing is done by a tester when he is not aware of the program code. So he does not have the program code available with him. He doesn't know how the code has been written, but he still wants to test that application, that program. So how does he do that? He basically compares expected results with actual results when the program is run. And what do I mean by that? For example, let's take a look at this application, the calculator. Now this program has been written by somebody else, and if I want to test this, then I can just run simple tests and see if this is working right or not, right? And I am not aware of what the program code was, right? I've never seen it. So if I want to test this calculator, I'm going to black box test it by using values like 5 plus 3. I know the expected result is 8, and when I test this also comes equal to 8. So I know that this is working fine. I'll try some other value like 6 multiplied by 9 should give me 54, and let's see if this is working that way also. So this is how black box testing is done. You compare expected results, so this is what you're expecting, with actual results when the program is run. Okay, let's move on. Let's go on to white box testing. Now white box testing is different. In white box testing, the tester has the program code available to him. So whoever is going to test the application or the program code has the program code available. He can see it, and that is how he's going to design his testing procedure based on the code. So let's take a look at how we can white box test we can apply white box testing to a piece of code. Let's take a look at this code, and this is from your book. This is an example from your book. What we're doing here is we're taking three numbers, input number 1, input number 2, input number 3. So these three numbers are coming from the user, right? He's inputting them, and then this code is basically what it's doing is it's printing the largest number out of the three numbers. Okay, and in white box testing, we must test every path through the program code. We must test every path through the program code. So we must test every branch that can be taken. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a look at the different branches that are there in this code, and we can devise our test data accordingly. Okay, let's take a look at the different paths through the code. Okay, one of the paths through the code is that if this number 1 is greater than number 2, right? If this is the situation, then we have two options. This is option number 1. So this is our first path through the code. Either this thing is going to be output, right? Or this would be the option number 2. So if number 1 is greater than number 2, then we can either go to path 1, right? Or in the else case, we're going to go to path 2. Okay, so we've identified two paths, right? So we must make this statement execute, and we must make this statement execute as part of our testing. So we should design our test data such that this statement gets executed and this statement also gets executed. Okay, and what about the other paths? See, if this is not true, then we go to the else clause here, meaning if number 1 is not greater than number 2, meaning if number 1 is less than number 2, then we come to this else part. And when we come to this else part, once again we have two paths here. This would be path number 3, right? If this is true, then this is what's going to be executed, and this would be path number 4, which means what? Which means if this is not true, if number 2 is not greater than number 3, then this else clause is going to get executed and this statement will get executed. So we've identified 4 different paths through the code, and we should select our data such that all of these 4 statements, all of these 4 paths should get executed. Okay, so for path 1, let's choose our test data for path 1. Okay, for path 1 to get executed means, this was our path 1, right? So this was the one that we wanted to get executed. For this statement to get executed, number 1 should be greater than number 3. So let's choose number 1 to have a value of 15, because we have to choose some value. And let's choose number 2 to be 12, right? So 15 is going to be greater than 12, which basically means, we are going to, this clause is going to be true. So we'll come here now. And here number 1 should be greater than number 3. So we have number 1 as 15 and we're going to choose number 3 as 8. So that's our test data, which will test and see if path 1 gets executed. Now in your exam you might get something like this, some sort of a tabular form which you will be required to fill up, and you can see that each line of code has been broken up, right? So it's the same code here on this side, right? And he's just written it line by line, and we'll have to fill up this column, right? And we can see the first number according to our test data that was filled up was 15. So when this statement executes, number 1 gets a value of 15, number 2 gets a value of 12, and number 3 gets a value of 8. Then comes this line, if number 1 is greater than number 2. For our scenario, 15 is greater than 12, so this evaluates to true. Then comes this line, right? Let's see. If this is true, then we come to this line, and here what are we checking for? If number 1 is greater than number 3, is 15 greater than 8, which is true, right? 15 is greater than 8. That means we come to this line, and this is what we are going to do here. We are going to output the value of number 1. So we're basically technically going to output this value 15 here. Okay, and you can see that these all have been left blank, indicating that this part of the code was not executed. Alright, so next up we are going to plan our test data for the second part, right? And remember, this was the statement that we wanted to get executed, right? So this was part 2 for us, right? Come here and then come here to this else clause. So this was part 2 for us, and let's see how can we go there. For that, number 1 must be greater than number 2. So let's choose number 1 to be 12, and let's choose number 2 to be 8, right? And then, if this clause is false, if this is false, then we can come here, right? So number 1 should not be greater than number 3. It should be less than number 3. So, right? So we've chosen number 1 to be 12, and we're going to choose number 3 to be 15, right? So because if number 1 is 12 and number 3 is 15, then this condition will be false, right? This will be false, which means what? We'll come to this else clause, right? And this statement would be executed, right? Okay, so let's fill this table up and see how this has been done. And it shows, that when this statement gets executed, number 1 gets the value of 12. When this one gets executed, number 2 becomes 8. This one gets executed, number 3 becomes 15, right? So these are the 3 values that have been input. Next comes this statement, right? Is number 1 greater than number 2? And is 12 greater than 8, which is true? So we've written true here. Then comes this one, right? And this is where we are checking whether number 1 is greater than number 3, and is 12 greater than number 3? And the answer is false, right? Because 12 is not greater than 15. So this evaluates to false, which when this is false, that means this statement will not get executed and will go to the else part of the code, right? and this is the statement that will get executed. So we've shown here by leaving this one blank that this doesn't get executed, and finally number 3 will be output, which in this case is 15, right? So this is what's going to be happen, and this part of the code obviously is also not executed. Okay, let's devise test data for path 3, and remember this was path 3. We want to come here and we want to execute this statement, right? For that, this condition must be false, which means what? Number 1 must be less than number 2. Okay, so we're going to choose number 1 to be 12 and we'll choose number 2 to be 15, right? So basically this condition will be false now. 12 is less than 15, 12 is not greater than 15, which means this condition is false, and we'll come here to this else clause. Within this else clause we want to execute this statement, right? And therefore this condition must be true. Number 2 must be greater than number 3. So this is number 2, which is 15, and must be greater than number 3, and we'll choose number 3 to be 8, right? So this is our test data. Let's now fill the table up. Okay, so now for test 3, right, let's fill this table up. When input number 1 becomes equals to 12, that's the value that the user entered. Input number 2, we planned it to be 15, and input number 3 we planned it to be 8. Now then we come to this line, is number 1 greater than number 2, and this is false, right? And that's exactly what we wrote here, which means all of this code is going to get skipped because this condition is false, and we're going to come to this part here, and here we check whether number 2 is greater than number 3, and number 2 is greater than number 3 because 15 is greater than 8, right? So this is true, which means this output statement would get executed, and that's what we are showing here. Okay, and finally we are going to devise test data for path 4, and for path 4, this, remember, was, we wanted this else clause to be executed. Remember, this was, so we wanted to come here first and then to come here and then execute this. This was path 4. This was the final branch, right? Okay, let's take a look at the test data. If this is false, then we are going to come here, right? So number 1 must be smaller than number 2, right? So this should be false, right? So let's choose number 1 to be 8, and let's choose number 2 to be 12. So now we've reached here, right? And here we don't want this to be true, we want this to be false. If this is false, then we are going to come to this else clause, right? So we don't want number 2 to be greater than number 3. So that basically means we want number 2 to be less than number 3. So number 2 is 12, and we're going to choose number 3 to be a larger number, which is going to be 15. So because 12 is not greater than 15, this is false, right? That means we'll come to this else clause and this statement will get executed. Okay, so let's quickly take a look at the table, and this we're looking at test 4 now. So when the first number is input, we chose it to be 8, so we have 8 here. Input number 2, we have 12 here. Input number 3, we have 15 here, right? Then this condition was false, and that's what we've written here. And then we can see that all of this gets skipped, right? We can see that here, right? And then we come to this else clause, and within this else clause, this condition is evaluated. Is number 2 greater than number 3? Is 12 greater than 15? And this is false, right? This is false, and we can see that this is false. Because this is false, this code does not get executed. It does not get executed, and we come to this else clause, and this is where we output the number, and that is exactly what you can see here.